The heart and the hidden axis of revival, where civilizations rise and recede from within.
A lantern in the breast reveals the heart's hidden chambers, pulse by pulse, breath by breath, where Faizani turns each word into a mirror of the soul, each page into a fragrance of eternity.
The heart and the hidden axis of revival, where civilizations rise and recede from within. Before we explore the mysteries of the heart, those scattered like stars across humanity's deepest spiritual texts, appearing not as a single doctrine, but as recurring insights revealed over time, it is only fitting that we begin with the ache that ignited this inquiry. For more than 3 decades, a quiet unrest settled deep within my chest, an unresolved question about the rise and decline of civilizations and the strange erosion of inner vitality that so often follows outward success. It resisted easy answers. No theory dissolved it. No system brought peace. So I turn your attention to this question, not as a representative of any group, nor as a scholar addressing an audience, but as a human being who has bled inwardly in search of meaning. I ask you, as a fellow seeker, to let your own heart pause and reflect. In the earliest moments of transformative history, when revelation and wisdom appeared not as bound volumes, but as living breath, descending gradually through inspired individuals, what force reshaped entire societies from within? What unseen current compelled ordinary people, rooted in inherited customs and hardened traditions, to abandon familiarity and walk toward an unseen horizon of meaning? In the case of the Quran, this transformation unfolded among a people immersed in hardship, fear, and moral confusion, so deeply that acts we now regard as unbearable were once normalized by survival and custom. The text does not avert its gaze from this reality, rather it names it directly. Do not kill your children out of fear of poverty. How dense must the darkness have been for such words to be necessary? And what quality of light could pierce through it with such decisiveness? What was that flame which tore through the night of the human condition? What wind awakened the sleeping soul? These were not people of empire, wealth, or formal learning. They were largely unlettered, unarmed, materially poor, and yet they carried a vision that crossed deserts, seas, and civilizations. Their power did not arise from external advantage, but from inner realignment. Parents stood firm even as children turned away, and children clung to truth even when it meant breaking from ancestral paths. Such transformations were not cosmetic or institutional. They were carved into conscience and character. While this chapter draws its clearest illustration from the time of Muhammad, peace be upon him, because that moment remains the most fully articulated record of inner transformation, the axis it reveals is not bound to a single land or century. History bears witness, across cultures and civilizations, to moments when conscience awakened, fear-based norms collapsed, and ordinary people rose beyond inherited limitations through an inner reorientation. The Quran speaks directly to Arabia because it first descended there, yet that the conditions it diagnoses and the inner laws it unveils belong to the human being as such. And now, let us turn the gaze inward. Before proceeding further, one clarification is necessary, not as justification, but as orientation. Although this chapter frequently cites the Quran and classical ethical spiritual collections such as Mishkat al-Masabi, these sources are not invoked here as sectarian authorities, nor as texts that require prior belief or cultural affiliation. They are approached as unusually well-preserved records of the human inner life, documenting perception, conscience, resistance, awakening, and moral orientation with rare psychological and ethical clarity. Just as one may study philosophical, ethical, or contemplative traditions beyond one's own background, these sources are read here as mirrors of the human condition and witnesses to universal inner laws, not as boundaries of belonging. With this orientation in place, the inquiry resumes, not outwardly but at the level where civilizations are quietly shaped or undone. Today, humanity stands surrounded by abundance. Knowledge multiplied, institutions established, technologies refined, information instantly accessible. Libraries overflow. Expertise fragments into countless specializations. Systems of law, ethics, and governance are meticulously codified. This reflection is not a rejection of knowledge, progress, or technological refinement, but a concern with imbalance. When tools multiply faster than wisdom and access expands faster than inner orientation, not because progress has erred, but because inner cultivation has failed to keep pace. And yet a question presses itself upon us. Why has the inner flame dimmed? Why does the heart no longer tremble with depth, intimacy, or urgency? Why does meaning feel thinner, even as information expands? Why has the inner lifeblood of civilization receded like a tide pulling back from the shore, leaving behind impressive structures that no longer breathe, rituals without renewal, and words recited without resonance? Is it because we constructed systems without spirit, accumulated knowledge without reverence, and preserved outer forms while neglecting the living core that once animated them? Is the one whose heart has been opened to surrender so that he walks in a light from his Lord, like one whose heart is hardened. Woe to those whose hearts are hardened against remembrance, for they are in clear error. The house remains furnished, but the guest has departed. Knowledge expanded horizontally, but it did not descend vertically. We mastered the mechanics of the world, yet neglected the laws of inner life. Our shelves are full, our chests are hollow. We repeat inherited words, but the fire that once ignited hearts no longer burns within us. The surface widened, the depth thinned. Yes, we function, we organize, we perform inherited practices. Outwardly, we appear established, but inwardly, we have not ascended. In many ways, we have descended, generation after generation, into distraction, fragmentation, and inner fatigue. And the question remains, where are we truly headed? Earlier reflections attempted to outline visible structural reasons for this decline, yet the unrest persisted. The veil did not lift. The question remained unresolved because its root lay elsewhere. Then, by a mercy that cannot be claimed or explained, insight emerged from the very center we had neglected: the heart. The heart did not lie about what it saw. That is, there exists a form of witnessing beyond the eye and beyond calculation, an inner seeing rooted in sincerity and alignment. Beware the intuition of the human being whose inner being is awakened, for he sees by a light not his own. When the heart is refined and the inner life attuned, it becomes a mirror, reflecting meaning rather than merely analyzing it. Such a person does not walk by logic alone, but by an illuminated awareness that integrates reason, conscience, and depth. Across the Quran, this inner axis is not incidental, it is central. The text repeatedly returns to it, speaking of the heart as the seat of perception, the soul as capable of elevation, the ego as requiring restraint, the forces that distort inner vision, and inspirations that descend to awaken clarity. These are not marginal themes, they form a coherent architecture of inner reform. Yet humanity, particularly in later generations, reduced living guidance to surface application. We clung to fragments and mistook them for the whole. Vast reservoirs of wisdom meant to awaken conscience, refine desire, and cultivate justice were sidelined. From thousands of verses, attention narrowed to limited applications, repeated and institutionalized until the broader call to inner transformation faded from view. The remaining verses, rich with insight, ethical depth, and civilizational vision, were left untouched as though their purpose were ornamental rather than transformative. These verses were never meant to decorate speech. They were blueprints for inner revolution. They were light for the path, flame for the night, sparks meant to awaken a slumbering world. Yet we passed them by like beautiful doors, admired but never opened. We treated living wisdom as sealed text, preserved in form, neglected in function. Its call to reform the self and realign civilization was muffled beneath habit, routine, and inherited repetition. This moment is preserved with such clarity, not because transformation belonged to that people alone, but because its inner mechanics were recorded, examined, and transmitted with unusual precision. And here lies the deeper root of decline. We ignored the heart. Despite its repeated centrality in humanity's most enduring spiritual teachings. Now, to stir those whose inner nature remains responsive, we begin again, returning to selected verses and teachings, reflecting upon their intent, and unveiling their purpose. With humility, we descend into meaning, and through insight, ascend. For the sake of clarity, brevity demands restraint. Not every narration is cited here, yet those familiar with classical collections such as Mishkat al-Masabi know well. Reflections on the heart far exceed even the verses themselves. For the heart holds more than blood and breath, it is the crossing point between the seen and the unseen. What has been established thus far is not a doctrine, nor a demand, but an axis. We have traced the signs of decline not to the absence of knowledge, power, or institutions, but to the neglect of an interior center through which meaning, orientation, and vitality once flowed. Having identified the heart as this hidden axis, where perception is refined and direction is set, the inquiry can no longer remain abstract. The question now turns from whether the heart matters to what the heart truly is, how it functions, and why it holds such decisive weight in the economy of human destiny. The chapter that follows enters this interior territory directly. It draws upon the language of revelation and the testimony of prophetic wisdom, not to impose belief, but to illuminate the depth, dignity, and responsibility entrusted to the human heart. What was approached in this chapter as an axis will now be encountered as a sanctuary,